Welcome to the podcast, Wait, What Do You Do Again? Where we talk to everyday people doing amazing things. I'm your host, Megan DeFord. Let's go. Today we are talking to Lisette Alvarez, storyteller, producer, podcaster, and digital strategist. Enjoy. Lisette, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited for our conversation today. I feel like our conversation is going to go in a lot of different directions, but I love that you are not only a storyteller, but a traveler and a digital strategist. Can you talk about what all of that means and how you came to the work that you're doing now?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. One of the things that I like to consider myself as is I'm multi-hyphenate. I came into this world. My dad's Cuban, my mom's Canadian. I was born in the US. I'm a military kid. I consider myself part of the LGBTQ plus community. I have lived all over the world in my formative years, so I also feel that I'm a third culture kid too. So for me, when it comes to identifying what I do and what I love, it comes from this place of where are the best stories? And how can I find more? So for me, when it comes to travel, I mean, I'm also a big foodie, don't get me wrong. I love when I travel, I will absolutely find good places to eat. But the biggest part is, it's the new stories that I get to create for my life. When it comes to being a strategist, especially a digital strategist, digital storytelling is one of the things that I have always been drawn to. When I was in college, both my undergraduate and graduate degree programs had a partial focus on digital storytelling and communication work, as well as my research papers were actually quite focused on the influence of digital media in broader stories and cultural impact in the real world, not just the digital world. So for me, when I look at all the different ways I identify myself, it is this kind of mosaic or stained glass window of the various pieces of the person I call myself, and it's all kind of the glue that holds it together are the
Yeah.
stories that make up me and who I am and how I view the world, how I perceive the world. And for me, it's the constant search for new and interesting new perspectives, new stories, a pluriverse of experiences, if you will.
That's amazing. I love that description of a mosaic or a stained glass window. That's really beautiful. And also something you said about you're creating stories, new stories for your life, which is like such a beautiful way to approach life. So you were a military kid
Yes.
and interesting family combination of
Yeah.
Cuban American and Canadian. Did you travel internationally as a child?
Yes, so we lived in Europe and South America before I turned 18 in terms of, we were in three foreign countries and multiple states within the United States and during my formative years. I was in four high schools in 4 years, in fact.
Wow.
So it definitely was a impactful experience being in a place where you don't speak the language, you're not familiar with the food, you're not familiar with the culture, the social norms. That was something that I think at a younger age, and maybe also based off of my kind of like my base personality, I was able to really enjoy, and it's something that I continue to do to this day because I found something in that process. I think that truly enlivened me as a human being, and it's something I associate with things that I love to do, of being dropped in the middle of nowhere with no context, no language, and figuring out a way to connect. Has always been something I feel I learned at a very young age how to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And was there any particular place that your family was stationed that you felt like had the biggest impact on your life?
It was definitely the first place that we went to, which was Naples, Italy. I was 9 at the time, I believe, and we were there for 2 years.
Wow.
That place definitely, because we also had the opportunity while we were living in Italy to visit all the different other
Yeah.
countries in Europe too. So it wasn't just being in one country and just experiencing that culture. We were, it was actually, my parents were very thoughtful and intentional in making sure we did not live just on base, right? We actually lived, we did live with other military families, like
Hmm.
in a neighborhood with majority military families. So we still had kind of that sense of familiarity and safety in that way. But we were still like every day at school, like every day before school, sorry, we would be picked up at a bus stop that's in front of this open air fruit and vegetable stall with rotisserie chickens and like roasting right on the street corner. I mean, it is a very different type of cultural experience than your suburb in,
Yeah.
I don't know, New Jersey or something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Or even DC. I mean,
Or
like
even
it's
DC,
yeah, just
exactly.
totally different. And probably influenced, I mean, being stationed in Naples, not so bad
Yes.
for being a foodie.
Food? Oh, not at, oh, that I would probably argue that is probably the reason why I'm a foodie
Yeah.
now is my palate was tuned when I was in Italy, and it's
Yeah.
specifically Napoli, Bella Napoli. There's a phrase that people like to use is that you cry when you arrive and you cry when you leave. And the idea that it's just a lot. The culture is very rich, but it's also overpowering. It's also very different. Culture shock is easy to get into when you're in Naples specifically, apparently. But then it's so easy to fall in love with.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah.
I would say Italy definitely was the place that clicked that for me.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier before we started to record about how communication is probably the most important part of human interaction, right? And it's something that actually I don't think we do particularly well. And even though we have so many forms of communication, I was laughing the other day. My daughter, we bike to school in the morning. And I got stuck at a crosswalk and she kept going and she looked back and I like did the thumbs up, keep going because she couldn't hear me. And it made me think like, wow, we have so many ways of communicating with each other. Um, but one of the things that is also, I think, just so impactful is the storytelling piece of it. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to storytelling and also how you use storytelling in everyday life, whether it's on your, fiction storytelling work or if it's just us talking today or at dinner with your friends?
Yeah. So for me, storytelling, and to your point on communication, there's a great book that I read a few years ago called Spell of the Sensuous, which is by David Abrams, I believe. And he talks about kind of the origin of human speech and the origin of kind of in an anthropological study. And one of the things that truly uh, connects in the way that I also think about storytelling and I think about communication is that we don't realize that it is not just a human thing. It makes us human, but it makes us alive.
Yeah.
Every being communicates. And I think for me,
Oh, I just got like
understanding
chills. That's that's amazing. Sorry.
right? I mean, like I communicate with one of the things that I appreciate so deeply in terms of the skill of good communication is the moments when I have two cats, and when I'm able to clearly make them clear that I am listening to them and that they can ask me of things, even though they cannot speak my
Yeah.
language, even if it's something basic like, I want to play, I
Yeah.
want food, I want to go to sleep, or leave me alone.
Yeah.
Those types of things are
Yeah.
very, very clear and distinct, but it's something that it's beyond, it's bigger than human. And I
Yeah.
think that for me makes storytelling as a form of communication, as a part of the Venn diagram, I guess, of
Right.
what communication is, as just as important and sacred, if you will,
Mhm.
with with regards to the various activities humans encounter in the day to day. So for me, Storytelling is something that I have always loved to do. I have a photo of myself at age 3 holding like I'm in a little robe and I'm holding a mic to my face. It's a black and white photo or like a kind of a sepia
Uh-huh.
tone photo, but it's adorable. But I have always been my parents used to nickname me Chatty Cathy. I would
Uh-huh.
just yap 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 all the time. So I've always loved to talk. Whether or not I would ramble, which I am prone to doing, I will continue to talk. Um, but as I got older, I got introduced to reading and writing, and I became a huge reader. I've always been one of those kids who you could find at recess, probably with a nose, their nose in a book,
Yeah.
and or playing soccer. That was
Yeah.
my go-to. And it was also at a fairly young age where I started to write. I started to write stories, fantastical stories. I grew up with both my parents loved to read us stories. I grew up with my grandmother telling us fairy tales. So for me, it comes from a long lineage, I
Hmm.
guess, of people who just love storytelling, love love that act and that process uh of sharing the fantastic and the
Hmm.
magical. So when I started to write, those are the types of worlds I enjoyed exploring was the fantastic and the magical. And even now, when I look back and I look at how I am influenced now about how I speak, how I communicate with other people, is I do try to infuse the magical into the mundane. I want to be able to have this point of communication be something special,
Hmm.
right? That can be a point of connection rather than debate. I when I was in graduate school, I took a class called Conflict and Dialogue. And one of the things that I learned, and I also take this with me, my professor was Palestinian, and he had been involved in conflict dialogue sessions in some of the most horrible conflicts in the world, Northern Ireland, in Serbia, in Palestine, Israel. And the thing that he communicated to his class was that the most dangerous thing you can do in the middle of the conflict is to strike out and do dialogue with your so-called enemy, because dialogue is not debate. It is not it's not even um negotiation where people are trying to get this and that and trying to figure out what side gets what. Dialogue, in a way, requires both parties to enter into a space and enter into communication with with the idea of creating something new together that they cannot create alone.
Hmm.
And that for me is what great storytelling can do. And it's something that I am only human. I will fail at doing great storytelling, but it is something that calls to me, and it's the reason why I do what I do. And it's the reason why at the end of the day, whenever I talk to anybody and I try, whether it's like you mentioned, like whether it's, to my doctor or to a friend at a dinner party, or if it's just to my cat
Hmm.
sometimes,
Yeah.
I try to bring that manner of bringing a little bit of the magic, a little bit of the unknown or the mystery or the openness and curiosity into a sharing type of space, into a dialogue type of space.
That's really beautiful. And I think it also honors the magic that's all around us, right? I mean, we actually, when you stop and look around at the world, like it's a pretty magical place, even in mundane situations.
Yeah.
Um, so I absolutely love that. So you have an academic background in international affairs in both your undergraduate and graduate degrees. How did you how did you decide on that? And then how did you go from that to now storytelling and podcasting and producing and all the digital work that you're doing as well?
asking the good questions. And that has very long answers. And I am not someone who gives short answers
Yeah,
to
that's great.
questions.
That's totally fine. And it's funny because it makes a lot of sense looking at it, your academic background from how you grew up and having a multicultural family and all of that tracks really well. And what you were just talking about, actually, I can sort of see the thread lines there, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Absolutely. No, I'm ready to go. So when I actually initially applied for university, I actually auditioned for a BFA in musical theater programs.
Nice.
I did a lot of theater in middle school and high school, choir and everything, and so that's where I wanted to be a creator, wanted to be a performer. Um, and I did get into one program, but because my eventual alma mater, Florida State University, offered me quite a generous scholarship, I decided to go there and just be a bachelor of art in theater.
Mhm.
And after the first year, I realized I just wasn't being challenged enough.
Mhm.
There were things that I wanted to explore that didn't quite fit within the theater realm. And I realized too that I could get a lot of the skills that I was trying to get in the theater program outside of theater. I could do
Mhm.
community theater, things like that. So while I was still doing creative work and theater and performance and acting, I switched my major over, I think initially to Spanish and then to international affairs when I learned, and it wasn't clear at the time, I think, when I learned that international affairs at FSU was an interdisciplinary
Mhm.
major. So I actually was excited to have this new major where I could take film classes. I could take like international film classes. I could take religion classes. I could take cultural classes, language classes, politics classes. So my degree ended up being very interdisciplinary
Mhm.
and a reflection, I think, as I said at the beginning, this mosaic of who I am.
Yeah.
And when I kind of transitioned to that, I had not a big idea of what I wanted to do next. I wanted to maybe be on the Travel Channel and do have a documentary, or a show on the Travel Channel. That was one idea. But as I started getting further into my degree, I realized that most people who are in international affairs or international politics degrees tend to go in certain directions. They usually go for U.S. State Department in terms of becoming a diplomat or
Mhm.
getting to the Foreign Service, as well as other types of kind of government oriented work, especially foreign service work, that's with the Department of State or with the CIA.
Mhm.
But it was clear that the smart thing to do would be to continue pursue international affairs, especially those types of career paths required a graduate degree. So I decided to pursue a graduate degree as well in international affairs. And I moved up to DC and went to George Washington University, where I got my master's degree in international affairs and security studies. There I was even more I started to focus a little bit more on issues in terms of security issues, in terms of terrorism and counterterrorism, cultural related conflicts, those types of things. And during my time in graduate school, I was taking the Foreign Service Officer test. And I failed twice. I applied to all sorts of I actually did intern actually when I was an undergrad. I did intern in the US Embassy in Rome,
Oh,
Italy,
cool.
actually, for a semester. So again, I was kind of
I
on a
mean,
path
crushed it
to
with that
pursue.
decision. It's
Right.
it's a great
I mean,
internship.
right. It was a wonderful internship too, and a wonderful place to have an internship. So that was kind of my direction I was going.
Yeah.
And in grad school, and I believe I can say this now because nothing actually came of it. Well, nothing in a certain way. I was invited to the interview stage of the clandestine service with the Central Intelligence Agency. And that was a very interesting experience because at the very end, I also felt too, similarly with the FSOT, the Foreign Service Officer Test, that I had failed after that interview. Um, and this was, of course, this is during a time, and I think many people who've experienced this in their lives in those kind of mid-20s, the quarter life crisis, as you will,
Mm-hmm.
of what it is I actually wanted to do in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that last interview, that last rejection, if you will, really made me turn inwards and
Mm-hmm.
think, is this what I'm actually supposed to be doing? Right?
Yeah.
And I do believe sometimes things come in threes. So two
Mm-hmm.
foreign service officer to reject like fails and a interview fail. I had to ask myself, is this what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
And I got the sense of I didn't fail. I actually passed because there are just certain things that I am not willing to bring myself to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for who I am as a person, being true
Mm-hmm.
to myself, that I cannot just bring myself to do on behalf
Sure.
of a government, on behalf of somebody else. And service work does require some of that, regardless of what type of service you do. I've worked with nonprofits, as you know, there's in terms of even other types of service work, there are certain things that you have to set aside in order to get something done.
Yep.
And for me, in that context, on that path, I realized this isn't the right way for me to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I also, during this time, I had been on and off writing. And I would do a National Novel Writing Month. I started churning out some novels for the couple of years I was doing it. I would pitch them out. They would get rejected, like, and I would shelve them. And then I started listening to podcasts at around this time too. And the podcast that actually grabbed my attention was a show called Welcome to Night Vale. And
Mm.
it is a fictional podcast in this style of a radio play about a weird town in Nevada. And there's conspiracy theories, there's like strange, unusual, surreal happenings. It's a wonderful show. And it got me thinking. I like to write. I enjoy acting. I could probably teach myself how to edit audio. What if, as a my next challenge for National Novel Writing Month, I write a season of an audio drama? And during this time too, while I was looking for work, I managed to get
Mm-hmm.
work at a web agency, a web design and development agency as a strategist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, kind of still going into a career, and I was
Mm-hmm.
developing my digital media skills as well. And so that also helped while I was also learning to like edit audio because I was already working with software to and learning software in
Right.
a way I hadn't before. So I wrote this show called Kalila Stormfire's Economical Magic Services in December 2017. I launched it, and I got attention for my work in a way that I had never experienced before. This is in the days of Twitter when our community used to be on Twitter. But I was connected with a group of audio drama fiction podcast enthusiasts, and also received an audience. And my transition to doing storytelling work, that's a little bit of a longer story in terms of still do having a full-time job and then eventually building my business.
Mm-hmm.
But my business is called Stormfire Productions for a reason. Kalila Stormfire um to this day has just under 1 million downloads.
Wow.
And it made me more sure of my own skills and of my own path as a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it gave me the courage to develop a business mentality and a entrepreneurial mentality of what if I could do this or this type of work and work in this field for myself.
How did that, first of all, congratulations. I mean, that's amazing,
Thank you.
right? That's amazing. And a couple questions about it. How did it feel? The creative process is so different than you're also an entrepreneur and there's the business side and like taxes have to get
Yes.
paid and stuff like that. How
Yes.
do you balance those two things? And then also, as someone who's a creator, how did you become comfortable with being a creator? Going from that experience of thinking that you were going to be in the foreign service or something around that to now a creator, a creative type, an author. How did you
Yeah.
embrace that?
Yeah. So I'll ask the first question you asked, which was about how what I do to kind of balance the hats, and then
Yeah.
I'll answer your second question. How I balance the hats, and it's funny because a couple of months ago I was griping to my therapist about the fact that I was having trouble. Um, I'll give an example. I was going through editing my latest show, my upcoming sh show, Havana Syndrome, which we'll talk
Mhm.
about more later.
Can't wait.
And I was coming up against this as I was going through scripts to edit, to do significant edits to the scripts to, make sure the plot was right and the character dialogue was good. I was coming up against this mentality of like, well, will this sell well to the audience? So I was essentially I had a voice that was inserting during the creative editing process, a marketing take
Mhm.
or a sales take of like, is this gonna play well to a broader audience? Is this gonna be commercially successful?
Right.
And so I was griping to my therapist about like it was causing me a lot of stress, right? Because part of it is like, well, I want to be true to my artistic vision, but I also want this to sell well. So how do I balance that's exactly the question. Like, how do I balance the two? And she actually suggested to externalize the hats that
Hmm.
I wear. And the way that I solved that problem is one of my pandemic hobbies that I picked up was crochet.
Hmm.
And so I decided to crochet, and I'm going to show you this, a frog that I can put different hats on.
I love it. It's a crochet. For those who can't see, it's a crochet frog with an adorable crocheted hat.
Yes. So I developed different
Oh
hats.
my gosh.
I just
Amazing.
put on another hat. So there's a red hat, there's a little black beanie, and then I have a little blue beret.
Oh, fabulous. Love the blue
So
beret.
in terms of the practical ways that I balance out, part of it has been the mental process as well as the physical kind of like fun process of externalizing
Hmm.
what when I am going to be doing something creative and when I'm going to be doing something related to the marketing
Hmm.
because don't cross the streams.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
No crossing of the streams. It really and it I think for me it does reduce that stress level, which I think makes for a better. I want to say it from a marketing, it makes for a better product, but at the same time, it also keeps my vision for my work alive.
Hmm.
And I think that's how I that's how I personally balance
Hmm.
the two. And I will also say making uh hiring out or contracting out tasks that I really hate doing and
Hmm.
that I have the budget to it's that externalization of tasks um compartmentalization that is extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah,
that's the answer to
absolutely.
that.
We can probably talk about this ad nauseum at another time, but like I think about George R. R. Martin and the whole Game of Thrones, all of it.
Yeah,
And it's just funny to me because it's like George, HBO had to land that plane. Like the books weren't done, and
right.
and it's and I hope he finishes the books, and I can't even imagine, um, but yeah, there is that balance of at the end of the day, this isn't just a labor of love and a passion project. This is your
Part
job.
of business. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
exactly.
So,
No, and that's something that I have tried to walk the tightrope, doing those both of those things myself,
Mhm.
right? Being both of those people in one, and obviously asking for help and figuring out ways to better walk that line is very important. Is making
Mhm.
sure I'm being held accountable by people I trust. And the other aspect of it too is talking to the on the creative side
Yeah.
is not being too precious about the work. For me, and I do this when I work with other creatives. I part of my business is that I consult with other creative people.
Mhm.
Um, who are either working on scripts or working on, various stages of their creative projects or creative careers. And one of the things that I often say that is that I'm going to be your cheerleader, but I'm going to be a cheerleader away and making sure that you finish this because you will not, I don't care if it is subpar, but at least you got to get one draft down
Yeah. Yeah.
because no one will be able to tell your story the way that you can. No one will be able to paint a painting like you can. No one will be able to write a poem like you can or shoot a social media video, whatever
Yeah.
it is, or to whatever story it comes from, it has to be told. And that's where I'll be kind of the hard ass
Mhm.
on, apologize if, can I swear
No.
on this podcast?
Yeah, I prefer it. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. If I can be a hard ass around the concept of this will come out, this will
Hmm.
be done.
Yeah.
Um, because I think that is one thing that paralyzes people who want to do creative work is this idea that it has to be perfect before it's done or set or put out. When I did Kalila Stormfire, I didn't have an editor. I actually never passed it through any gatekeeper. And this is something that I promote a lot. With you understand, there's some value, I think, to gatekeeping, to good editors, because they can make your work and the skill of your work better. I think, though, we live in a time, in a society where we too often give more credence to gatekeepers as an excuse for not finishing and putting out our art.
Hmm.
And in a time where it's so easy, it's so accessible to post something, to film something, to share something, I think that paralyzing, perfectionism is a detriment to people becoming creatives and claiming kind of what you just said of like, that, and I can move to this of like what it means to claim the title of a creative, of an artist, of a writer, of a filmmaker, of a storyteller. Um, you have to complete your art in order to claim that. That is one thing I
Right.
will say. You have to complete it. You have to put something out there. It's painful, it's terrifying. But it is so, so, so fulfilling when you are able to reach down deep into your soul and
Yeah.
share it with the world.
Yeah.
Even with all its, pock marks and scars.
Right.
I think that vulnerability and that honesty and that truth is what art truly is.
Yeah, I agree. I am someone who often is paralyzed by perfection, and I have to constantly remind myself like progress over perfection, because to your point, otherwise it won't get out. I love that point that you made of you can't claim that creative insert role here unless you're putting it out in the world. And the people who like your work are going to find you, and the people who don't aren't your people. They're just not,
Yeah,
right? Especially in something that's so subjective. I love
exactly.
Picasso, and I can't tell you why. I mean, I really can't tell you why, and there's other artists that I'm like, just not for me. Like, I can't tell you why. It's
Exactly.
just not. Um, that's I love everything you just said around that. So, and I want to talk about Havana syndrome, but first, let me ask your opinion on, we talked about this a little bit about podcasts in particular, I think are such an interesting medium. And I think back to Charles Dickens and how he did his works that we now read as novels as serials in the newspaper. And thinking about that actually makes me kind of think about podcasts today. I guess Netflix and things like that, there's series that way, but I got into podcasts because of the podcast Serial, and I was hooked. I mean, I just absolutely loved it. And I'm someone who also loves reading, but it was such a different experience. Can you talk about why do you think podcasts have have succeeded and continue to be successful? What is it about a podcast in this world where we have so much visual content, where we have every book and magazine known to man at our fingertips on our phones? Like, what is it about podcasts that you think grabs the attention of so many people?
I will say in the I can't say how many years now is it if it was 20 since 2017
Yeah.
since I started listening to podcasts and this conversation comes up regularly about what is it about podcasts? Is it successful? Are more people going to listen? Is it marketable? Like, there's all there's very, very frequently asked questions about the nature of podcasts. I
Hmm.
think the answer is actually quite simple in
Hmm.
that podcasts harnesses one of the oldest mediums, which is audio.
Hmm.
When we talk about storytelling, the origin of storytelling, the first stories were told, they were spoken, they were
Yeah.
oral. There was no video. There were some you could argue that there eventually, like the first films, which is really cool, like those cave paintings in
Yeah.
what is it, Spain or Portugal or whatever, that has they if you shine the light differently, it actually kind of moves
Kind of
the
moves.
animal.
Yeah.
Like, it's fascinating. And like as a potential like first film, like those visual storytelling is also a part of our heritage as humans. But when we talk about storytelling and its first form, it was oral. It was oral storytelling around a fire in the home, from grandparents to children. It's an ancient way of telling stories.
Mhm.
And the purpose is to put you into another world. It's a form of escapism. And I think audio specifically, sound specifically, allows us to change our brain chemistry to put us in a different frame of mind, a different um, perspective. The suspension of disbelief, I think, comes from storytelling, comes from, it's almost like an invocation of once upon a time.
Yeah.
You immediately get set to enter into another world that is not the world that your day to day, your boring life, your what have you. And I think podcasts do that to our brains in a very similar way. It, especially things like serial, things like that are narrative or scripted,
Hmm.
are purposefully and masterfully putting ourselves into this state of suspension of disbelief. And in a similar way that films do as well, or films attempt to do, is to solve the problem of getting an audience invested. But I think because audio is just older, it's the first thing. People who are really great storytellers are able to hit that note, if you want to put it that way,
Yeah.
and get people interested in listening for long periods of time. And we are such a stressed out society. Having podcasts versus, I mean, people like to say like rotting on the couch in front of
Right. Right.
Netflix. We still do that. Like, that's still, it's it's something we are encouraged to, and we desire to do. We enjoy entertainment like that. When it comes to podcasts, I think people who are avid podcast listeners, I find, and this is, I don't know if there's any data to this,
Sure.
I find are actually less stressed out in general, because I feel like they're diversifying their content intake versus what is on Netflix. And in some ways, podcasts are longer form.
Yeah.
They sometimes take longer time to listen to. You have to really like set aside time versus like, well, I'm going to sit on the couch. We like to multitask,
Yeah.
right? To do it. There's a kind of meditative approach to podcasts in a way that's not quite so when you're, watching Netflix or Disney Plus.
Yeah, 100%. Uh, again, I love everything that you just said, and I think it's so true in terms of that audio piece of it. And even, I'm not a huge audiobook listener. I prefer reading most books, but there are a few, like Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights. I actually have
Mm.
recommended to people don't read it, listen to it because he's narrating it. And I was like, it just completely changes it. I mean, it completely changes the experience. Um, and there's a different sort of connection, I think, when you're listening to someone's voice and you're creating even people that you know, like one of my favorite podcasts is Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, and I know what
Oh
he
yeah.
looks like. And like I know what they look like and I know what most of his guests look like, but like I'm doing my dishes and it's almost like they're there with me, right? And you can kind of
Yeah.
create this little scene in my mind. And maybe I don't know, maybe I should bring that up with my therapist, but like it is different than sitting down and watching it. Like my brain isn't working the same way as when I'm listening to podcasts, whether it's something silly or something. There's another podcast I love about ancient civilizations, and it's the fall of ancient civilizations, and they can be anywhere from an hour and a half to 4 hours long. And it is just a very different experience listening to it. So tell me about the Havana syndrome. I don't know how much you can talk about, but I want to hear like how from start to finish, like how did you come up with it? How long have you been working on this project? Whatever we can find out about it. What is
Absolutely.
it?
All right. So, Havana Syndrome is a international spy thriller and alternative reality game coming out this Thanksgiving.
Wow.
And this is a story about siblings who must find their sister who's gone AWOL from the CIA after hearing a mysterious sound that has plagued diplomats, spies, and military officials around the world. So this is based, some of you may know, and it's interesting. I did a like semi-sample size of my cast members for this
Uh-huh.
show. If any of them have actually heard of Havana Syndrome, the real life conspiracy theory, mystery, whatever you want to put it. If you want to call something that has been investigated by the NIH, has been a 60 Minutes special, has been, in part of the hearings on the Hill over the
Yeah.
last few years. Havana Syndrome is a phenomenon where a couple of diplomats, intelligence officials and military officials in Havana after we reopened the embassy in Cuba, started to hear a sound, and then experienced various symptoms of dizziness, vertigo, unfocus,
Yeah.
and to this day it has yet to be publicly solved as to why this was happening. Since then as well, there's been reports of it happening in other countries as well,
Mhm.
but that's a whole other story, I'm
Yeah.
sure. But
Yeah.
it's been dubbed Havana Syndrome. And I am a Cuban American. I think I said at the beginning.
Mhm.
And my family's history does center around, leaving after the Cuban Revolution. Part of my family was actually involved in fighting in the Cuban Revolution. The story of Cuba is a very sensitive one and very, it's a hot wire
Mhm.
politically as well. And when I decided to write a story, I actually initially focused on I wanted to write a story about siblings, about me and my siblings' experiences being third culture kids living
Yeah.
abroad. And as I started to kind of pull together, well, what could possibly be the kind of key plot around it, I also wanted to explore, well, the story untold. I failed to get into the CIA. Well, what if I did? And what would have happened? What are the things that would have happened? So eventually I started pulling further and further, and then of course the mystery of Havana syndrome made complete sense to as someone who is a podcaster seeking out a sound-based mystery as a part of their plot
Yeah.
made sense. Being Cuban American made sense. Wanted to talk about sibling dynamics made sense. So I decided to about 3 years ago write a the first season of hopefully a number of seasons of this audio spy thriller, Havana Syndrome. So that I think covers what it is and why I decided to write it.
That's very cool. And so you said that you polled the cast members if they knew what Havana syndrome was. It- Again, didn't even think about this. Can you talk about that process? I mean, you're not only,
Yes.
imagining it, creating it, writing it, but now you're finding people to actually voice it.
Yes. So this is actually something that like I said, it's been in the writing process for 3 years. I have experience with Kali the Stormfire of having other people do the sound design, but my experience was I was primarily the one writing and directing it, and I had experience bringing other people on as cast and directing, and essentially DIY figuring out how to direct people.
Yeah.
For this show, as I actually pitched it to a couple of studios. Um, I had one that was interested, but it was dragging its feet in terms of actually developing it. And this kind of goes back to my point around gatekeepers.
Mhm.
I realized I want this story out. I want to be the first person to write a fictional story about this. There have been actually other podcasts.
Mhm.
The Sound by PRX is a really good
Mhm.
investigative podcast about Havana syndrome if people are interested in. But I wanted to be the I wanted to get this story out. I
Mhm.
wanted and similarly of like not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
I did not want to let perfection and waiting on funding a bigger company to produce this.
Mhm.
So I made a deal with, and this is something that I love to be transparent about. I made a deal with my husband, who has a very stable job,
Mhm.
that I was going to focus on producing this. All the money that I'm developing my company, Stormfire Productions, all the consultations and the odd jobs that I'm doing. I want that funding to go towards making Havana Syndrome happen. And he agreed. And I not only that, around the same time last year, I also applied for a artist residency with Crosstown Arts in Memphis, Tennessee. I was accepted, and I will be going this Saturday. I guess for people
Amazing.
listening, like basically this fall.
Amazing.
I'm going to be at this artist residency to produce Havana Syndrome full time for 3 months. I
Wow.
will be there for 3 months, and I don't have to worry about anything else except for making this and creating this.
Wow.
I will be wearing all the hats essentially, except for voice acting. I am very grateful to have had some people volunteer their time to support the casting process. We have over 40 actors on this
Wow.
project, so I had a volunteer casting assistant. I have worked with other people to do some of the puzzle in terms of the alternative reality game side of it. We're hoping to do some geocaching, some
Cool.
digital puzzles and things like that in association with this project. Um, I've I have a good support system, and I think that is what is so crucial to being able to do this ambitious of a project is having support.
Mhm.
And that is invaluable and I'm incredibly grateful for, and I want to give credit to people who are willing to step up in various creative lives to make sure that they have the opportunity to take advantage of
Yeah.
to make their work happen. And this Havana Syndrome was one of those projects where I truly have leaned in to my community to help me get this done and
That's,
out.
oh my gosh, amazing. Congratulations. I am so
Thank you.
glad you didn't go into the CIA. I'm
I
so
know,
happy. That's amazing.
right?
I have the three questions that I ask every guest,
Yes.
which the first one is, what advice would you give to your younger self? And then I'm also going to ask, if I can add a bonus advice question, is what advice would you give to someone who's listening, who's like, whoa, I feel like there's that little fire in me that I want to turn into a flame, like, and do this. What advice would you give to them as well?
So the advice I'd give to my younger self is to be gentler,
Mm.
to be gentler to themselves, and to enjoy, to soak in more and more of life instead of worrying about what other people think.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's interesting because I was undiagnosed with ADHD as a child, and that
Mhm.
was a hard thing to try to handle. As best my parents supported as best they could without knowing any of that. Um, and it was definitely only until the last few years where I was diagnosed, and I could look back at the things that my younger self struggled with and realize it's not your fault.
Mhm.
It's just the
Yeah.
way your brain works.
Yeah.
Be gentler on yourself. Be kinder
Yeah.
to yourself. Don't be so hard.
Yeah.
And similarly, I think with anyone who wants to go into the insanity, the chaos of the creative field or the creative process, even
Yeah.
if it's for a hobby or anything, it's to be kinder to yourself in the process. Um, and when fear comes up, counter it with curiosity.
Mm.
I think that again, fear is the reasons why people decide not to do it, or to, that they get water doused onto that fire is because
Mhm.
of fear. A fear of what other people think, fear that you're not good enough, fear that you're going to offend, and when I say fear of offending people, I mean that you're trying to explore things that are within your realm that might
Mhm.
be, different, or that you don't know how other people are going to react to it. You always want to be kind to yourself, because I think that also solves a lot of problems of sticking your foot in your mouth type situation too.
Yeah.
But when it comes to making art and taking a chance on
Mhm.
yourself, approaching it with a sense of curiosity when you feel yourself feeling that fear or anxiety is so useful
Yeah.
to calming that part of you down.
It's it's incredible that you said that. And I think curiosity is one of the most useful tools that we can use as individuals,
Yeah.
whether it's when you're meeting resistance, get curious about it. And that's not what we're talking about today, but it's wild that you said
Yeah.
that, because right behind you, what you can't see is I have a post-it note that says curiosity is the antidote to fear. And I
Yes.
think that for every aspect of fear, right? Like leaning into that. And then this morning, I just read a quote by Aaron Copland that it's going to go up on my wall of post-it notes, but it says inspiration may be a form of super consciousness or perhaps of subconsciousness. I wouldn't know, but I am sure it is the antithesis of self-consciousness. And I was like, whoa. So I thought that was
That's
really amazing.
great.
And,
Yeah,
Aaron Copland, pretty good at what he did. So
exactly. Yeah.
that's great. Um, and what do you love most about what you're doing?
I love the feeling and I'll say this is what's happening right now. I've been doing table readings
Yeah.
and rehearsals essentially with the actors who are especially when I can get multiple of them, like in a Zoom room even together, and just have these characters be embodying the words that I have, these, imaginary friends that I've created.
Yeah.
It's breathtaking. It's magical. And like all I can say sometimes, and I try to be a good director and give good feedback. But the other side of it is just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. This is
Mhm.
just uh it's a dream come true. And
Yeah.
that, I think, is the process of having your dreams come true by making art. uh there are no words. I think that's where words fail us.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to listen to the friends that you created while I'm doing the dishes or vacuuming or
Yes.
or just sitting there and listening, which is very underrated. And it's something I have to remind myself of, like, you don't have to be doing something else while you listen to a podcast. You can just sit and be. That's really incredible. And we'll have all of your information on the website, and I'll put it in the episode information. But how can people find you in your work?
I realized that I missed one last thing. I
Yeah,
have
go
an
for it.
active podcast coming. This is related to this. I have an active podcast right now called Once Upon a Time in Havana, which
Love
is
it.
a prequel to Havana Syndrome.
Hmm.
It's a prequel documentary. It's a real life. It's about my trip as the first person in my family to go back to Cuba in over 60 years
Wow.
in the context of US Cuba history. So I describe and I have footage, audio footage of my trip to Cuba. And I talk about various issues and time points, the revolution, the Spanish-American War.
Yeah.
We're actually coming up on the 25th anniversary of the international custody case of Elian Gonzalez, for
Hmm.
people who might remember that. So this is a 12 episode, essentially serial, about my trip in the context of US Cuba history. It is out now wherever you get your podcasts.
Nice.
We're actively releasing. We're releasing through October,
Okay.
right before Havana Syndrome comes out.
That's nice. So Once Upon a Time in Havana, and then that will be a nice sort of prequel to Havana Syndrome. I love this.
Yes,
Amazing. That's wonderful. And then so people can find you on every streaming podcast platform. And if they
correct.
want to see your work online or socials, where can they find you there?
Yes, if you want to find me on a website, you can go to stormfireproductions.com. There you can find all of our shows and our partner shows. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to my website, lisettealvarez.com. If you want to find us on social media, go to we're on Instagram at Stormfire Productions, on TikTok at stormfire.audio.
Awesome. This is so great. Lisette, I could talk to you all day. This has been
Thank you.
so much fun. I can't wait to listen and to continue to see your success and just growth blossom. And I just really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me on. This was a wonderful, and you have great questions, and
Oh, thanks.
I hope to keep talking to you in the future.
Yeah, I hope so too. And absolutely, if you want to come back and talk about Havana syndrome or the process of what is the Memphis
Oh, Crosstown Arts in
Crosstown Arts?
Memphis,
Okay, cool.
Tennessee. I will also be actually, I do have a newsletter so that I'll
Mhm.
be updating people on my
Cool.
progress at the residency. So for those who are interested in the process of being in a residency, uh, follow along and you'll learn more. But I'd happily get back on the podcast and give a post-mortem
Yeah.
of what life at a artist residency is like.
Yeah, I mean no one gets to do that. That's awesome. It's like the
Yeah,
NBA of
I
the arts
know.
world. That's really amazing.
I'm still, I've been anxious about it for weeks now, and
Mhm.
finally my anxiety is turning into excitement.
Good. Oh, that's so
So
great.
yes.
That is awesome. Thanks for listening to Wait, What Do You Do Again? For more information about today's guest, or if you'd like to be on the show, please visit megdeford.com. See you next time.